Joining us now on Practical 365 from Microsoft is Janice Ricketts. Hi, Janice. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I am not bad at all. And we've just been chatting before we started the podcast, of course. And there's so much interesting stuff. Bastiaan is chomping at the bit to ask you some of the questions that we've got. But first of all, for those that didn't see you on stage in your sessions, panel sessions of tech last year in Dallas, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Sure. And I always hesitate at this question because I'm so old and I wonder how far back should I go? What do people really want to know? Because my background is really kind of all over the place. I started early in my career working for the Watervliet Arsenal, which is the only cannon manufacturer in the United States.
Wow.
I was an electrical engineer there.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And while I was there, I had a project deploying email. We didn't have email yet when I was there. So in my role, I created all the documentation, all the training. I trained everyone from the shop floor all the way to the colonel that ran the site. And then I ran the support desk. And I realized how much I liked training. So I became a Microsoft certified trainer. I taught TCP/IP. I taught Microsoft Mail, Exchange 4.0, 5.0, 5.5, NT4, TCP/IP. I was Microsoft MVP. I wrote a book. And I got the attention of some people at Microsoft, and I wound up at Microsoft for several years, back in 99 to 2005. And I left. I became a manager at a small systems integration company. We focused on hosted exchange. Then I left, started my own company. And then here I am back at Microsoft after all these years. So today my role at Microsoft is, for me, so fun and so exciting, especially to get to do things like this. What an honor to be invited onto your podcast. Thank you so much for extending this invitation.
I think a lot of listeners, especially after hearing your Exchange experience, and some years ago, the site was called Exchange Server Pro before becoming Practical 365, when Paul Cunningham ran the site. So a lot of our listeners and long-time readers will be, like yourself, been looking after Exchange from the beginning. I think, obviously your first Exchange version was not too much before mine. I think I was Exchange 5.0.
Oh, okay. Well, if you ever studied Microsoft official curriculum, I might have worked on it because that was my first job at Microsoft back in the day.
Wow. Well, maybe you helped me through the odd MCP.
Yeah, well. Certifications maybe. Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm pretty far from that now.
Yes.
I work as a product manager for Global Secure Access, and I work in the customer experience engineering team. So I have kind of two hats in that role. One hat is I'm really trying to help our customers be successful with Global Secure Access, helping them through proofs of concepts, and then helping them deploy. And that's a lot of coordination back into the feature PM team, the engineering team, working with support, making sure that these customers are heard and that they can be successful with our product. But the other piece of that is working with the engineering teams and making sure those scenarios are well known to them so that the features that we create and the way we enhance our products actually do what our customers need them to do. So it's very fun to be in that sort of middle space between engineering, feature PMs, and customers and their requirements.
I've worked with other teams. I'm not trying to drag you back to Exchange, but
I love it.
but a chap, Brian Day, was working on some multi-geo stuff some years ago, and I'd seen him as an MVP, a bit like yourself. He then went into the product groups, and then he was working on the beta teams to bring people on board. And I remember that he was working with my customer and I think two of my big customers at the time. And from what you said, it sounds like your role is a little bit similar in that you're working with, is it larger customers that are early adopters? So, they're the trailblazers, but also putting themselves not at risk, but if they didn't have the support of Microsoft, it could otherwise be going into the unknown.
It is a true partnership, actually, when we work with customers like that, because they are spending just as much of their time understanding what they're trying to accomplish and where there might be issues as they are deploying. Mm-hmm. So that understanding is so helpful for us. We bring that back in through as I said, the feature PM team and request updates to the product, but also to documentation, helping our support teams be more successful. It really is a very fun landscape to work in.
Now, in your role, and you and I, Janice, we had this amazing conversation on stage in Dallas at Tech.
That was good.
It was a great session. So for anyone who wants to see it, I think it is actually at the Quest website, so you can download it. But, you know, we had this conversation about zero trust and how you actually work within that environment. I kind of posed this the scenario that zero trust is almost impossible to achieve, especially with microsegmentation and actually documenting and making sure that you can audit the entire communication path. Within your role, how does Microsoft see zero trust, and how do they recommend potentially implementing it?
It's such a hard journey. I totally appreciate what you're saying. And for customers to say, I want to become zero trust, I'm not sure that that is a destination. I think you make an excellent point. How do you get there? I think what customers have to do is balance their requirements with costs. What can they reasonably accomplish?
Yeah.
For Microsoft, especially for global security, global secure access, what's very cool for me about the product is not just that it's a relatively new product area for Microsoft. That network level security is something very unique for Microsoft, leveraging some very cool technologies, which I'll mention here in a second.
Yeah.
But what are we really trying to do, right? We're really trying to make it easier for customers to verify explicitly, get to that least privileged access, and be able to assume breach. One of the areas that's been difficult for a long time for many customers is, how do I manage my remote scenarios? I've got all these workers working from home. They VPN in, and once they're in, they've got free access, right? They can port scan, they can look all over. No more, don't really have great control or great reporting. And in addition to that, how do I control what internet sites they're going to? How can I manage and report on my Microsoft traffic? All those things are so hard. And so that is why, for me, global secure access is so exciting. It's so exciting. A new product area engineered and built from the ground up at Microsoft, leveraging Microsoft's private global wide area network, which is one of the largest global wide area networks in the world, enabling customer data to maximize their time on that private network, not just floating around on the internet, right? Joining a close point of presence managed by the Microsoft service in the cloud, and then integration with conditional access policies, enabling you to not need a VPN anymore. Mm-hmm. You can control right down to the IP address, port, protocol, what your users are going to be allowed to connect to on your private network. It's very powerful.
So what do customers see, and what is the benefit? Can they actually track the entire path of communication from the endpoint, the mobile device, to, through the corporate network to the end service application or whatever? How does that work?
We are constantly improving our auditing and logging. And actually, there's a lot of that in work in private preview, public preview, even today. So we're constantly trying to increase the visibility. And this is one of the areas where our customers help us a lot. When we're in private previews and customers say, I really need to be able to see X, that's great feedback for us so that we can try to improve that logging scenario. But that is exactly what we're trying to offer to customers, is they can see who logged in, where they logged in from, what did they log into. We control it at the network level, and we can interrupt it. So if we need to force a reauthentication through something like universal continuous access evaluation, we can do that at the network level with global secure access in a way we've never been able to do before.
And you mentioned Microsoft Secure Service Edge. What is that? Is that the technology which it's built on and allows the customers to utilize these services?
So the product is both Security Service Edge, and we also call it Global Secure Access. What it is it comprises two product areas: a way for you to connect to your internal private resources over Microsoft Entra Private Access, and also a way to control your SaaS apps and Microsoft services using Microsoft Entra Internet Access. And these are separate product areas, but what both of them are basically doing is enabling you to have a client installed on your device. Your device is either hyper joined or Entra ID joined. That device's agent downloads all of your rules, network segments, app descriptions to the device and does traffic acquisition. So if you want to acquire traffic by FQDN or you want to acquire traffic by IP address, that's what the agent's doing. And if the traffic that is generated is a match for one of these IPs or FQDNs that you've defined in your rules on your deployment, it will route to the global secure access edge, be processed in the cloud, and routed to the correct set of connectors to enable you to have outbound secure access to any resource on your private network. If it's internet access, we're doing something similar. We're looking at every internet packet, looking to see if it meets rules. We have allow and block rules, secure web gateway kind of functionality. And if it's allowed, we enable routing through our network, through internet peering, to exit close to wherever that SaaS app's point is on the other end. All of that being audited and all of that being controlled for you through the network.
So traditionally, SASE is implemented within many organizations. How does SASE differ from this service?
So we're providing the cloud-based service that enables integration with Entra ID so that you can use conditional access policies to control your network traffic. We're not actually routing, we're not providing the routing mechanism. We are saying this is the data that we're going to pick up. These packets meet our rules, and we're routing according to however your network is configured. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's the biggest sort of question I have. Has it different from a traditional VPN? So I'm not asking this as a stupid question, but I know the answer. But as someone who's not implemented it and not read all the documentation on it yet, I understand some of the basics. But at a high level, if someone said to me, "Steve, explain, how's this different from a VPN?" I'd fumble around the answer. That's for sure. So I'm wondering, what to me, when you describe it, it's got a lot in common with a VPN in a way, but also a lot in common with traditional web security proxy as well.
Yes, that's a really great analogy is app proxy. So if you're familiar with app proxy, it's the same idea. It's just that app proxy only enables access to your websites, internal websites. And it's not a tunnel that goes through the Microsoft Private Wide Area Network. We've extended app proxy, the private network connector, to enable access to anything on your private network, anything that you can address using an FQDN IP address over TCP or UDP. You can control that point to point. So when the device connects, it is only connecting to that particular resource. You cannot.
So the tunnel is a point-to-point tunnel, and it's for all of the traffic to that destination IP address or IP range, but effectively over what the user wouldn't see is how that's encapsulated in transit, which could be HTTPS or I don't know what it is. So I know obviously for app proxy it would be, but it's effectively, it's not doing pure TCP routing down a VPN tunnel. It's taking the traffic, and by route you mean it's connecting to the endpoint for the equivalent to app proxy, and then piping all of that traffic, TCP, perhaps UDP, down that whole.
We're using
whatever it is.
We're using gRPC tunnels. We're connecting through the service edge. So when you've got private access configured, Entra private access configured, we're looking at connecting to the private access tunnel. And that is going to connect through your the closest point of presence that you've got. We've got them all over the world. Connect to that point of presence to the service. And the service is going to say, okay, I see this IP address is defined in one of your app segments. The rule says I need to route it to this connector group. You've created a connector group that's per region, and the connector group enables you to route to various connectors, load balance to those connectors in that group. Those connectors are just VMs running Windows Server. They've got a piece of software called the Private Network Connector running on them, and they then route your traffic outbound from those apps. So there's no inbound access to your network. It's all outbound from those private network connectors.
So when organizations have DLP procedures in place, traditionally encrypting data kind of mitigates the entire data loss prevention. It's very difficult to check, who is potentially moving data that is sensitive, classified, depending on how the organization structures it. How does this service deal with DLP within an organization?
So we're still working on integration for DLP. Of course, we have Purview for that. But one thing we do have specific to the Microsoft products is universal tenant restrictions.
Okay.
So universal tenant restrictions is a scenario where I'm concerned about my employees using my corporate managed devices to connect to other tenants that I don't know using valid credentials. I don't want them to connect to valid tenants with valid credentials while using my device because I'm worried about that scenario.
Yeah.
And with Global Secure Access, we can control that to Microsoft tenants using tenant.
Because those are huge holes. That's very interesting.
I mean, holes that if you had another third-party proxy, you could fill. But I suppose I wonder whether it for years it's been something people just didn't talk about, because it seems an obvious problem for every organization. Talk about doing all the DLP in the world, but then say, and we've got rid of all our proxy server infrastructure, zero trust and all that. But this is filling a missing piece there that some organizations would have kept those in place, primarily for, right?
Yeah. It's a very hard space. I totally agree. It's really tricky.
Now, when I think about organizations that have went down these routes, many have, especially, larger enterprise customers are all Microsoft shops. And yes, maybe they have kept some security controls in for things like tenant restrictions in the past. But they've used things like app proxy. Certainly, a lot in the past. They've used what was MCAS, Defender for cloud apps and so on, to provide access and restrictions against some of their SaaS apps, and to provide DLP to some of those SaaS apps as well, alongside using conditional access with Entra ID to manage the access to those apps too. And they've spent a lot of time and effort, sometimes re-architecting existing applications, but also potentially, I say a long time, in that they may have waited for the time to replace a finance system to get to that point where they can have web-based SaaS applications. For those kind of organizations that have adjusted some of their infrastructure to meet what perhaps Microsoft 365 E5 or the Entra premium licenses offered, say 5 years ago, is there any key areas where, by revisiting what they did with perhaps app proxy, cloud app security as it was, Defender for cloud apps, coming back now and changing some of what they do at the next opportunity to take advantage of the global secure access? Is there some benefits that they can get?
Yeah, it's kind of a broad question.
I know there's no one answer in a way. I'm trying to give, hence the sort of scenarios of, let's say they've got some SaaS apps, they're web-based apps that they're publishing at the moment. They consider that they are in a reasonable situation, and perhaps they do have a VPN in there that is maybe, as some of my clients have hosted in Azure, effectively the endpoints to meet some of those edge cases. But they've got app proxy all over the place as well, being used. Add a sort of high sort of strategy, that the light in the sky for the next place to go to. Where should they be looking ahead? Should they be carry on with what they're doing, wear it out, or look towards global secure access to pick and choose new features, or is it going to be a mix and match?
We're definitely not recommending to rip out and replace app proxy with private network connector. And this is actually the same software in the end. It's the same tool. But that app proxy deployment is working fine. Keep it there. It's doing what it's supposed to do. There's no reason to remove it. And actually, we don't have all of those scenarios yet in Global Secure Access because we really are only supporting managed devices. So unless your device is running the agent and joined to your tenant, either Entra ID or hybrid joined, we can't tunnel that traffic, right? We need to be able to pick it up. And app proxy does not require that. So it's better for multi-tenant scenarios and BYOD kind of scenarios. So no, we're absolutely not saying rip out your app proxy deployment and move to private access. But what we are saying is if you have more to do, you've got other on-premises apps or other interesting scenarios. Like there's a lot of interesting scenarios out there. I was talking to a customer today about their dev test labs and how they need to be able to spin up dev test labs and different subscriptions and different VNets, and they've got overlapping IP addresses. How can we handle that?
Mm-hmm.
And we can handle that easily with GSA and FQDN acquisition. So there's a lot of really cool scenarios that we can do that app proxy wouldn't be able to do. So I think that that's something that a lot of companies could think about. Is there use cases here that maybe we want to use a different tool for connecting to these other kinds of environments?
What about, say, I think always on VPN is probably the most common all Microsoft shop going using all the other stuff like we've just mentioned as the sort of backstop that pops to mind. And I'm guessing I guessing there's possibly a good case to leave that behind. That would be my question, I suppose, if I was a large enterprise customer who was wavering between carrying on maybe a 10% done deployment of moving to, say, always on VPN, and then looking at this option and thinking, is this gonna be a better one?
And they really have to consider their priorities. And honestly, there's also costs here. Global Secure Access isn't free. So there's a lot of pros and cons. And I think that there's room for all of these products in the marketplace. Different companies have different priorities. But if
VPN is for Microsoft, and see, the customers I'm thinking of, let's say they put those in Azure, so they're paying egress on that traffic as well, right? So there's a cost to using that, and they've got to maintain it as well. Let's say all costs were equal, and they were just about to pick between the two. Are there any factors that would say they'll actually pick always on VPN over, say, Global Secure Access?
Well, you're talking to somebody who works for Global Secure Access. So
I know. So I'm looking for
I might be biased.
Yes, but I'm sure you can think of loads of reasons that you would use it, right? But what are the reasons why a traditional VPN solution or always on VPN for Microsoft might be if all costs are equal? Let's say those legacy apps are hosted in Azure, for example, or on-prem, but the costs aren't different. The latency is not necessarily going to be a factor. Are there any technical sort of reasons that you might stick with something like always on VPN? If you had,
nothing that isn't going to be resolved in time. There's things today, maybe, that I would say we don't meet a use case yet for Global Secure Access. So VPN maybe still needs to be there. But certainly over time, it is the goal to enable companies to make a different choice and to not miss anything. But there's definitely some scenarios we don't cover today.
So if I was working at an enterprise, I'm about to jump down that route of perhaps 2 or 3 years of my life, and I'm looking to a position to prioritize what I do and when, then that's the time to look at the roadmap for this and see if my needs are met now or in the future, but keeping in mind that if I'm looking to align to the Microsoft strategy for Global Secure Access, then probably that's the route I want to be going down.
It's certainly worth evaluating. And we've got we've just published some great documentation actually over the last few weeks. We've got proof of concept guidance to help guide a customer through thinking about what their use cases are. And then we've got deployment guidance. If they make a decision to deploy, how can we strategize moving users and apps to Global Secure Access? How do we deploy connectors? So there's some really helpful documentation that maybe can help answer some of those questions. And maybe you're right that the answer is it's not for me today.
But Steve, you mentioned something really interesting, talking about the roadmap. Janice, for our audience, is there anything you can say about, you know, what's potentially on the public roadmap that, you know, you can talk about and maybe lift the curtain a little bit of what's going to happen next in the Entra ID space, which is always on. There's always new features coming, always new security applications and services. Is there anything you can talk about?
You know, this product went GA just last summer. And for the 3 or 4 years before that, all the engineering effort was really based on creating the cloud services. But since then, all of those engineers are pointed at feature enhancements. What new functionalities and what new features can we add to make this more valuable? And as a result, there is so much on the horizon. I, of course, cannot talk about anything that's in development, requires NDA and all that kind of good stuff. But that universal continuous access evaluation, that is in public preview. That is something you can test and look at today. It's not GA yet, but basically being able to force a reauthentication at the network level that applies to every application, not just Microsoft products, every application, very powerful. And we've also got some work happening, I mentioned earlier, in logging. We've got a lot of improvements happening around our client support. So Mac OS and iOS clients are in public preview. So we really encourage our customers to try those out and let us know what they think. And we had a huge announcement actually a couple of months ago at Ignite. How are we going to grow our internet access product? It's a really difficult area. And so we announced an integration with Netscope. So that's a very exciting advancement to enable us to work with a partner to provide top-level advanced threat protection through global secure access. So there is a lot of very cool stuff coming.
One thing I'm getting from a lot of what you've said is that many of the gaps that people could, for sometimes the right reasons, have found in conditional access or combination of VPN and conditional access, that they're not getting closed through making things more difficult for users. It sounds to me like they're getting closed by making the product better and cover more scenarios to meet the needs of businesses, right?
Absolutely what we aspire to do. We don't want to increase friction unnecessarily at any level. You're absolutely right. We're trying to close those scenarios in the product.
And to me, you know, if we went back to the first days of, say, conditional access, back when it was still obviously, you know, Azure AD, but it just came into its own really as a product when it first became premium licensing. It felt like conditional access was for Microsoft 365 or for Office 365, right? It's kind of testament to the fact that we're talking about this as a solution that, on a whole, Entra ID is serving for almost scenarios that it wouldn't have dared to compete against 10 years ago, and that's or less than that, 5 years ago, right? That's a big leap and bound, really, with some of the most recent products that have came out. So, from what I've heard, people probably need to reevaluate what they're doing with Entra ID. I know you're not going to disagree, so there's not a question. Should you reevaluate? Should you look at Entra ID again if you perhaps went another route with it? But what, you know, is it still, you know, is Entra ID a best of breed solution almost on its own now, or is it part of a best of suite kind of solution like, you know, people present Microsoft 365 as a whole a few years ago?
I mean, you don't have to ask me. You can take a look and see what Gartner says about Entra ID. We try very hard to position ourselves optimally.
Yeah. Well, I've seen over the years it's going up and up and up into the right places in the magic quadrant, but sometimes that doesn't convince the people that are buying, because on one hand, some of the people that are buying various security products probably like having 5 vendors to take them for for beers and dinners, right? As I would, you know, no disrespect to you know, to be able to have a selection of suppliers, right? But that they often, you know, they're often picking from other people in the top of the Magic Quadrant.
Yeah.
That's one of many sort of factors, isn't it? And
There's
then there's the
definitely,
reality of it where it's been in the top, but I don't know, it's not covered enough scenarios to tick some of the most complex businesses
yeah,
needs.
well, you're right about that. There, and we still work on that. We're constantly releasing new features and working to compete, right? We want to be the number one solution in all of these areas.
Thank you, Janice, for coming on the show today. It's been so interesting to talk about global secure access, and of course, you know, much more, and you know, your vast experience in back in the days of Exchange, which I'm sure will seem familiar to many of our listeners. So, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. The honor is absolutely mine. So nice to see you again, too, Bastiaan. Thank
I
you so
hope
much.
to see you and your husband in Minneapolis on the 30th of September at the Tech. I can't wait to see the two of you and have a drink with you again. So
Cheers to
thank you
that.
so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.